Okay. Um, my name is Howard Eber, and I am an alcoholic. And as Kathy mentioned, we're going to do something different this evening, something we've never done before, but we're going to give it a shot. Last week, Rob magnificently covered. It was Kathy's birthday last week, so we went out to celebrate. Wasn't it the birthday?
No,
Oops.
we weren't going to be back in time. My birthday was
Oh, that's
Friday.
right. Yeah.
Thank you for the shout out.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, Rob.
And Rob did a great job, completed the chapter. But there are some things in that chapter I wanted to spend a little bit of more time on. In if you have your book handy, on page where does it start? Page 26, the book makes reference to a certain American businessman. And we've identified that guy as Roland Hazard. But who was he? What's the significance of Roland Hazard? We know how he fits into this story, and it is a story because not all of the details in this book are really factual, but he was a real person, and he did have enormous, profound effect on our history. So let's take a look at exactly who Roland Hazard was and how he unintentionally became a quiet founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, if you want to take screenshots of any of this as we go through it, you're welcome to do that. But let's go through it. Connecting the dots. Roland Hazard and Dr. Jung, and as I said on page 26, it tells us a certain American businessman. Let me get this screen out of the way. Businessman had good ability, good sense, and high character. For years, he floundered on from one sanitarium to another. He consulted the best-known American psychiatrists, then had gone to Europe, placing himself in the care of a celebrated physician, the psychiatrist Dr. Carl Jung. Now, we know that because we've read page 26. But, like I said, who was Roland Hazard? Well, here's a picture of handsome gent. In Alcoholics Anonymous, it's difficult to find another person except Bill tied to more misinformation and myths and rumors than Roland Hazard of Rhode Island. Facts of his life are clear enough to display how the cunning, baffling, insidious disease of alcoholism impacted a man of above average intelligence, wealth, and promise. Roland is a prime example that alcoholism can rule anyone, regardless of health, wealth, heritage, genetics, or education. His story needs no further embellishment. Remarkable is the path his life followed and the contacts and coincidences, direct or indirect, that occurred. Roland's story, quote unquote, brought Carl Jung's name into AA lore, and his actions enabled Ebby T to carry a message to Bill W. That, in a nutshell, is Roland's significance. It allowed Bill to bring Carl Jung into our history, and it also enabled Ebby to carry the message he did to Bill. Roland is one of those people who caused notable events in AA history to occur, but was never an AA member. Roland Hazard came from, at the time, the Hazard family was probably the richest family in America, and they had been for some time. Their holdings, their business holdings, eventually became, I believe, Allied Chemical, Dow Chemical. They were in politics. They were in all kinds of industries. They had a lot of money. So the description on page 30 of the book AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, might apply to Roland with a question mark. So here's what it says on page 30. The idea that somehow, someday, he will control and enjoy his drinking is the obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. We learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves we were alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently maybe, has to be smashed. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking, and we know that no real alcoholic ever recovers control. The Hazards of Rhode Island were a founding family of America's economy, establishing themselves in textiles, manufacturing, mining, railroads, chemicals, banking, from early 1700s well into the 1900s, from coast to coast in the United States. Following Yale in 1903, and as the oldest Hazard son, he joined the Hazard firm, managing various company and family enterprises across the country, eventually returning to Rhode Island in 1912. At 36 years old, he envisioned himself as heir to lead his family's enterprises, but following his father's death in 1918, the Hazard family placed their business empire under control of his younger brother, 10 years younger, at 26. So he got passed over. Talk about resentments, huh? Someone else may have inherited an automotive dealership. Roland got passed over for control of the company. Uncomfortable or resentful by his secondary role, Roland joined a Wall Street investment banking firm and moved his family to New York from Rhode Island. His Great Gatsby lifestyle progressed from social drinking to drinking with consequences, and he probably crossed the invisible line to alcoholic by 1922. From 1922 to 34, Roland floundered, as it says in the book, from one sanitarium to another, in cycles of abstinence, controlled drinking, in and out of private sanitariums and hospitals, one of which was this exclusive rest home in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, called the Austin Riggs Clinic. He was there, hospitalized there for a bit. Family correspondence indicates Roland was directed towards help, often in the 1920s, and he was in McLean's Hospital, Appleton House on the left, and on the right is the Emmanuel Movement's headquarters in Boston. Again, the Emmanuel Movement was another our organization like ours, like the Oxford Group, like the Washingtonians. Acquaintances from the 1920s, the time he was helped but didn't wish to stop, Roland favored, quote, harm reduction versus total abstinence. He worked with Reverend Worcester, Courtney Baylor, who we'll talk about in a moment, Sam Shoemaker, who we'll talk about, and very possibly Richard Peabody. We'll be talking a lot about Richard Peabody in the next chapter, more about alcoholism. In March to April of 1926, following a drunken adventure in Bermuda, Roland's family knew another trip to Riggs Clinic, McLean Hospital, or Butler Hospital wouldn't help. The Hazard sought help from his Yale friends George Porter, Charles Aldrich, the McCormicks, and his cousin Leonard Bacon. All had been treated by Carl Jung for I can't even pronounce that. Neurasthenia?
Neurasthenia?
That's it. I'll go with that. Depression, addiction, or alcohol problems starting in 1900. They all supported Jung's work and remained in contact since their treatments. So the Hazard family were friendly with these guys who had been treated by Carl Jung. It's not a coincidence that he went to see Dr. Jung, nor is it the third choice, Dr. Freud being unavailable, Dr. Adler being unavailable, and he took the third one on the list, Carl Jung. That never happened. With their influence, Roland and Helen, his wife, were fast-tracked to Jung and given preferred treatment for 4 to 6 weeks in his Zurich clinic. Roland worked with Jung and Helen with Tony Wolff during May and June of 1926. Roland wrote to family of his treatment, giving them hope for success. Jung probably explained powerlessness over alcohol and the need for an abnormal drinker to surrender and seek a spiritual or religious experience and fellowship to relieve his addiction, that an alcoholic would never again be able to drink in safety. Returning from Zurich, Roland only stayed sober a few months, resumed drinking in the fall of 1926. Helen, as promised, divorced Roland as a result of his slip. She said she would, and she did. So then he tried some geographicals between 27 and 34. In February of 27, he went on a safari in Africa, another disaster. And his poor brother Tom had to come and drag him out of Africa back to London, where he went on a binge, and his disgusted family members just left him where he was. Returning alone to New York, he sought quick miracle cures, including spinal taps from Dr. Cowles, but soon lost control again and embarked on yet another geographical tour west to New Mexico, which resulted in more disaster. Anyone identify with these kind of stories? Roland's lost years were from 27 to 31 in New Mexico and California. Desperate and alone, Hazard retreated to Santa Barbara and got sober again with help from George Potter, Charles Aldrich, and Dr. Peter Baines from 1929 to 31. Contrite and newly sober once again, Roland returned east in early 31, where he pleaded his newfound sobriety case to Hopeful Helen. Hopeful Helen and sober Roland remarried in New York in April 31, with only a few members present, but all their lawyers were there. And I'd love to say, and they lived happily ever after, but that's not the story. In May 31, the entire Hazard clan embarked on a grand tour of Europe. During the tour, Helen and Roland left their children with family for a few days to visit Carl Jung in Zurich, showing that Roland was finally sober. 5 years following their 1926 visit, this was the famed 1931 visit of AA mythology. This is the one we all talk about, where he went to see Dr. Jung. He went with his wife. What were the motives for Roland's revisiting Jung in 1931? Perhaps he was truly grateful with his newfound sobriety and wanted to show Dr. Jung that he finally got it. Jung knew of Hazard's slips since 1926, as Jung was in regular contact with Porter, Bacon, Baines, and often visited the U.S. Carl Jung would not tip his hand. Jung would be more than pleased with Roland's new sobriety. Carl Jung and Sam Shoemaker were similar souls. They were helpers first, needed no credit. They only wanted to help the troubled. He wanted to help the troubled Roland get well. There's a mistake there. That word "the" should be taken out. Returning to America, Roland and Helen moved back to New York. In fall of 31, Roland again resumed drinking. What a shock. Causing problems. In desperation, the Hazard family turned to Courtney Baylor once again. Not Dr. Jung, Courtney Baylor. In 1931, Hazard's family placed Baylor on retainer. He's not an attorney. He's a doctor. He's a psychiatrist, but they placed him on retainer, not just for Roland, but for the whole family. Baylor was a proven family therapist and a good listener, and calming demeanor and common sense. Author of Remaking a Man, he knew Roland well. Baylor counseled Roland in Boston in the 20s and again in 31 to 34 in Boston and Vermont, but Roland could not or did not want to stay sober. Roland had dry months with Baylor, but apparently the two weren't connecting. So a selfless Baylor suggested Roy visit Sam Shoemaker in New York. Roy is what they called Roland, incidentally. Baylor knew Sam's special talents for changing men one-on-one, which might work with Roland. Roland needed dramatic soul surgery. That's the term that the Oxford group used for their activities.
Love it.
Soul surgery. During spring 1934, Roland returned to New York, sought help from Sam Shoemaker again. Sam started Faith at Work meetings in 1926 at Calvary. adding the Oxford groups later. Roland knew many members, so his entry into the groups in 1934 was easy, and his daughter Caroline, a younger Oxford group member, suggested he see Sam by 1931. Over many one-on-one sessions in spring 1934, Roland surrendered. Sam had made him feel special and included him on small Oxford teams traveling New England, Canada, Ohio in the 1934, including a sober Victor Kitchen. Sam played to Roy's ego, which responded, and he stayed sober. As part of the Faith at Work and the Oxford groups, Roland wrote to family that he found his place, helping men get sober. That's in the Oxford groups. One of the reasons why he was drawn to the Calvary mission was his family was a big financial supporter of the church. Oxford group men were not all alcoholics, but all were addressing personal sins with faith and activities of surrender, confession, prayer, meditation, and service. They were an active faith tribe of educated businessmen and academics. Roland and Sam traveled on a number of Oxford tours and house parties in the US and Canada throughout the end of 1934. Note, while witnessing on teams, Roland did not refer to his young experiences, though he may have spoken of it privately with Shoemaker or even Bill W. later on, although we don't know that for a fact. I'm going to skip that. Following a 1934 Oxford tour in the summer of 34, Shep Cornell, Zebra Graves, and Philip Marshall Brown were at Hazard's Vermont home called Sugarbush when they learned of a pending appearance of Ebby Thatcher before Judge Collins Graves in Bennington, Vermont. Zebra knew Ebby and of his drinking problems. Zebra was also the son of that judge, Collins Graves. Whoever it was that appeared at court and presented an option to Judge Graves, who released Ebby into their custody. They took Ebby out of Vermont, brought him to New York, to Calvary Mission, where he straightened out with the Oxford group's help. The whoever's who showed up at court is unimportant, whether it was 2 people or 3 people, whether it was Zebra, Roland, and Shep, or just Zebra and Roland, it's totally irrelevant. But a foundation of AA legend took shape as a newly sober Ebby was encouraged to stay sober by carrying a message of hope to his friend Bill W. in 1934 in November, first planting the seed at Wilson's Brooklyn home and repeating the message days later at Towns Hospital in December of 34. The message, one sober alcoholic carrying words of hope to a still suffering alcoholic, 1-to-1. Ebby brought a newly sober Bill W. to meet his friends at Calvary and probably introduced Bill W. to Sam Shoemaker, Roland, and the tribe in 34 to January 35. Although, again, there's really not any proof that Roland ever really met Bill Wilson. Roland remained close to Shoemaker and Calvary as a friend of the Calvary vestryman for the remainder of his life. Sam made Roland feel special, sensing his need for private label recovery, remaining a closed-mouthed friend for Roland, 1-to-1. And here's some speculation by my friend who wrote this. Roland was probably too aloof for the early AA down and outers, who were really low-bottom drunks, and he was anything but a low bottom. And he would not have mixed well outside his team at the Oxford group. He had minimal, if any, contact with Bill W. after 37. He was not a leading Oxford group player, or Buckman would have publicized the connection. Buckman loved, Frank Buckman, who was the founder and head of the Oxford group, loved to boast about celebrities and rich people who were part of the group, yet he never took advantage of that. In his Oxford witnessing, Hazard never mentioned Jung nor Baylor. In 1936, Roland was reportedly hospitalized once again for drinking, again saved by his brother Thomas. He sobered up again in 1936 to 37, probably until his death of a heart attack in 1945. Roland's story gave Bill W. the opportunity to introduce Dr. Jung into AA lore and literature, and a way to input the concept of alcoholism as a hopeless condition requiring spiritual intervention. That's how we brought Dr. Jung into the picture. He presented the solution. Roland's relationship to AA was at arm's length without evidence he was ever a member. Questionable folklore placed him at Stewart's with alcoholics after Calvary Oxford missions. Stewart's was a cafeteria that the drunk squad of the Oxford group would go to after their weekly meetings and just hang out and drink coffee and talk. And it was said that Roland hung out there with Bill Wilson and these people. Never happened. Bill and Roland were never close after 37, confirmed in correspondence with Shep Cornell in 1945. A shoemaker's save and faith at work man, Roland was Sam's Oxford group member. Was the Young story told to Bill by Roland, by Ebby, by Sam, by Zebra, or was it just allegorical, which means a story? Who cares? It helped the book work. Opinion. Roland was one of God's instruments. By doing the right thing, Roland and his friends facilitated Ebby's sobriety, and by bringing Ebby to New York, Ebby was able to help Bill W. Then Roland Hazard faded away. Roland Hazard died in 1945 at his desk in Waterbury, Connecticut, of a massive heart attack. And he's an unintended influencer in the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, that gives you some information on who Roland Hazard was. And I find it interesting. Some of the stories we have come to accept as fact that are probably not. But it shows the significance. Why did Bill use that story? He wanted to tell about one alcoholic helping another through a spiritual solution to the problem. And he needed a way to introduce that. So what better way than to tell this story? It was beautiful. Dr. Jung and Bill Wilson. Now let's talk about that. There's a lot of talk about, quote, the correspondence between Bill Wilson and Dr. Jung, as if they were pen pals, as if they were in regular contact with one another. In point of fact, there were 2 letters, really 3, but I'll explain the third in a moment. Bill wrote a letter to Dr. Jung. Dr. Jung answered it. Then Bill wrote another letter, which Dr. Jung never got a chance to respond to because he passed away. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into those letters. We're going to talk to you about those letters. We're going to read those letters so you know what Bill said to Roland, Bill said to Dr. Jung, and what Dr. Jung said back to Bill. Rob, can you give me the handout that says letter to Dr. Jung from Bill Wilson? And incidentally, before we jump to that, if anyone wants to pick up this book, Carl Jung and Alcoholics Anonymous, it has all of that information in it, and it goes a little deeper into why Bill kind of idolized Dr. Jung to a certain extent. But let's take a look at this. This is the letter that Bill Wilson wrote to Dr. Jung. It was written January 23rd, 1961. Hun?
Yeah. My dear Dr. Young, this letter of great appreciation has been very long overdue. May I first introduce myself as Bill W., co-founder of the Society of Alcoholics Anonymous. Though you have surely heard of us, I doubt if you're aware that a certain conversation you once had with one of your patients, a Mr. Roland H., back in the 1930s, did play a critical role in the finding of our fellowship. Though Roland H. has long since passed away, the recollections of this remarkable experience while under treatment by you has definitely become part of AA history. Our remembrance of Roland H.'s statements about this experience with you is as follows. Having exhausted other means of recovery from his alcoholism, it was about 1931 that he became your patient. I believe he remained under your care for perhaps a year. His admiration for you was boundless, and he left you with a feeling of much confidence. To his great consternation, he soon relapsed into intoxication. Certain that you were his court of last resort, he again returned to your care. Then followed the conversation between you that was to become the first link in the chain of events that led to the founding of Alcoholics Anonymous. My recollection of his account of that conversation is this. First of all, he frankly told him of his hopelessness so far as any further medical or psychiatric treatment might be concerned. This candid and humble statement of yours was beyond doubt the first foundation stone upon which our society has since been built. Coming from you, one he so trusted and admired, the impact upon him was immense. When he then asked you if there was any other hope, you told him that there might be, provided he could become the subject of a spiritual or religious experience. In short, a genuine conversion. You pointed out how such an experience, if brought about by, I beg your pardon, if brought about, might remotivate him when nothing else could. But you did caution him, though, that while such experiences had sometimes brought recovery to alcoholics, they were nevertheless comparatively rare. You recommended that he place himself in a religious atmosphere and hope for the best. This, I believe, was the substance of your advice. Shortly thereafter, Mr. H joined the Oxford groups, an evangelical movement then at the height of its success in Europe, and one with which you are doubtless familiar. You will remember their large emphasis upon the principles of self-survey, confession, restitution, and the giving of oneself in service to others. They strongly stressed meditation and prayer. In these surroundings, Roland H. did find a conversion experience that released him for the time being from his compulsion to drink. Returning to New York, he became very active with the Oxford group here, then led by an Episcopal clergyman, Dr. Samuel Shoemaker. Dr. Shoemaker had been one of the founders of that movement, and his powerful personality that carried immense sincerity and conviction. At this time, which was 1932 to 1934, the Oxford groups had already sobered a number of alcoholics. And Roland, feeling that he could especially identify with these sufferers, addressed himself to the help of still others. One of these chanced to be an old schoolmate of mine, Edwin T. Abbey. He had been threatened with commitment to an institution, but Mr. H and another ex-alcoholic, Oxford group member, procured his parole and helped to bring about his sobriety. Meanwhile, I had to run the course of alcoholism, was threatened with commitment myself. Fortunately, I had fallen under the care of a physician, a Dr. William D. Silkworth, who was wonderfully capable of understanding alcoholics. But just as you had given up on Roland, so had he given me up. It was theory that alcoholism had two components: an obsession that compelled the sufferer to drink against his will, an interest, and some sort of metabolism difficulty, which he then called an allergy. The alcoholic's compulsion guaranteed that the alcoholic's drinking would go on, and the allergy made sure that the sufferer would finally deteriorate, go insane, or die. Though I'd been one of the few he had thought it possible to help, he was finally obliged to tell me of my hopelessness. I too would have to be locked up. To me, this was a shattering blow. Just as Roland had been made ready for his conversion experience by you, so had my wonderful friend, Dr. Silkworth, prepared me. Hearing of my plight, my friend Edwin T. came to see me at my home, where I was drinking. By then, it was November 1934. I had long marked my friend Edwin for a hopeless case. Yet there he was in a very evident state of release, which could by no means accounted for by his mere association for a very short time with the Oxford groups. Yet his obvious state of release, as distinguished from the usual depression, was tremendously convincing. Because he was a kindred sufferer, he could unquestionably communicate with me at great depth. I knew at once I must find an experience like his or die. Again, I returned to Dr. Silkworth's care, where I could be once more sobered and so gain a clearer view of my brain's experience of release and of Roland H's approach to him. Clear once more of alcohol, I found myself terribly depressed. This seemed to be caused by my inability to gain the slightest faith. Edwin T again visited me and repeated the simple Oxford group's formulas. Soon after he left, I became even more depressed. In utter despair, I cried out, "If there be a God, will he show himself?" There immediately came to me an illumination of enormous impact and dimension, something which I have since tried to describe in the book Alcoholics Anonymous and in A Comes of Age. Basic texts which I am sending you. My release from the alcohol obsession was immediate. At once I knew I was a free man. Shortly following my experience, my friend Edwin came to the hospital bringing me a copy of William James' Variety of Religious Experience. This book gave me the realization that most conversion experiences, whatever their variety, do have a common denominator of ego collapse at depth. The individual faces an impossible dilemma. In my case, the dilemma had been created by my compulsive drinking, and the deep feeling of hopelessness had been felt vastly deepened by my doctor. It was deepened still more by my alcoholic friend when he acquainted me with your verdict of hopelessness respecting Roland H. In the wake of my spiritual experience, there came a vision of a society of alcoholics, each identifying with and transmitting his experience to the next chain cycle. If each sufferer would carry the news of scientific hopelessness of alcoholism to each new prospect, he might be able to lay every newcomer wide open to a transforming spiritual experience. This concept proved to be the foundation of such success as Alcoholics Anonymous has since achieved. This has made conversion experiences, nearly every variety reported by James, available on an almost wholesome basis. Our sustained recoveries over the last quarter century number about 300,000. In America and through the world, there are today 8,000 AA groups. So to you, Dr. Shoemaker at the Oxford groups, to William James, and to my own physician, Dr. Silkworth, we of AA owe this tremendous benefaction. As you will now clearly see, this astonishing chain of events actually started long ago in your consulting room, and it was directly founded upon your own humility and deep perception. Very many thoughtful AAs are students of your writings. Because of your conviction that man is something more than intellect, emotion, and $2 worth of chemicals, you have especially endeared yourself to us. How our society grew, developed its traditions for unity, and structured its functioning will be seen in the text and the pamphlet material that I'm sending you. You will also be interested to learn that in addition to the spiritual experience, many AAs report a great variety of psychic phenomena, the cumulative weight of which is very considerable. Other members have, following their AA recovery, been much helped by your practitioners. A few have been intrigued by the I Ching and your remarkable introduction to that work. Please be certain that your place in the affection and in the history of the fellowship is like no other. Gratefully yours, William G. W., co-founder, Alcoholics Anonymous.
And if you don't mind, I'll read the next letter. This is Dr. Jung's response to Bill Wilson. Dear Mr. Wilson, and this letter was dated January 30th. So he wrote this letter basically 7 days after Bill wrote his. Bill wrote it on the 23rd, mailed it, got to Switzerland, was read, and he sent back his response 7 days later. Dear Mr. Wilson, your letter has been very welcome indeed. I had no news from Roland H. anymore and often wondered what had been his fate. Our conversation, which is adequately reported to you, had an aspect of which he did not know. The reason I could not tell him everything was that those days I had to be exceedingly careful of what I said. I found out I was misunderstood in every possible way. Thus, I was very careful when I talked to Roland, but what I really thought about was the result of many experiences with men of his kind. His craving for alcohol was the equivalent, on a low level, of the spiritual thirst of our being for wholeness, expressed in medieval language, the union with God. How could one formulate such an insight in a language that's not misunderstood in our days? The only right and legitimate way to such an experience is that it happens to you in reality, and it can only happen to you when you walk on a path which leads you to higher understanding. You might be led to that goal by an act of grace, or through a personal and honest contact with friends, or through a higher education of the mind beyond the confines of mere rationalism. I see from your letter that Roland H. has chosen the second way, which was, under the circumstances, obviously the best one. I'm strongly convinced that the evil principle prevailing in this world leads the unrecognized spiritual need into perdition if it is not counteracted either by real religious insight or by the protective wall of human community. An ordinary man, not protected by an action from above and isolated in society, cannot resist the power of evil, which is called very aptly the devil. But the use of such words arouses so many mistakes that one can only keep aloof from them as much as possible. These are the reasons why I could not give a full and sufficient explanation to Roland, but I'm risking it with you because I conclude from your very decent and honest letter that you have acquired a point of view about the misleading platitudes one often hears about alcoholism. You see, alcohol in Latin is spiritus, and you use the same word for the highest religious experience as well as for the most depraving poison. The helpful formula, therefore, is spiritus contra spiritum, which translates into treating spirits with spirits. Thank you again for your kind letter. I remained very truly yours, Dr. Young. Rob, you could take that down. And I'm going to read something to you from this book, Carl Jung and Alcoholics Anonymous, that fills in the gap. What happened after that? Bill got the answer from Dr. Jung and immediately responded. And this is what it says in the book. Wilson was presumably aware of Jung's interests in seances, telepathy, and the paranormal. These are all things Bill got involved with in the 50s. His letter put forward the idea that human consciousness after death might be measured using modern scientific instruments. The archives in Stepping Stones, the former home of Bill Wilson, contain extensive written notes on the seances which took place in the ground floor room next to the kitchen. On the last page of his, next to the fireplace, I'm sorry. On the last page of his 3-page letter, he broached the issue of using LSD to help suffering alcoholics. Bill believed that a transcendent LSD experience would be sufficient to convince alcoholics in denial that there was a spiritual component to their mind. He wrote that despite some psychiatrists thinking that LSD experiences are related to schizophrenia, he was sure that was really the case. Bill referred to his own use of LSD and felt it put him more in touch with reality and believed that it's harmless and non addictive. Bill often referred to Hoffer and Osmond's research studies at the University of Saskatchewan in Canada. They conducted research on using LSD for alcoholism and claimed a recovery rate of 50%. Bill claimed that he was aware of 50,000 administrations of LSD in the United States and Canada, barely none of which resulted in any damage, while the overwhelming majority had benefited the participants. Bill ended his letter by asking Jung to comment on those remarks. Wilson's letter was acknowledged by Aniela Jaffe, writing on May 5th, 1961. She explained to Bill that it was the ill health of Dr. Jung that prevented him, the 86-year-old Jung, from replying himself to the letter. Dr. Jung read your letter. He had in his mind to answer you, but he fell so ill, and the doctor ordered complete rest. Feeling better, he left for a long vacation, and therefore the mail is just not done. Maybe he will write you at a later time. Jaffe added a postscript. P.S. He said he's very much interested in the work of Alcoholics Anonymous. How's that? Bill Wilson replied to Jaffe's letter on May 25th. He said, as you know, I sent him a considerable batch of material about Alcoholics Anonymous, and my last letter posed questions which he may neither have the time or energy to answer. So I add my concern to yours, that he not be burdened unduly. Dr. Jung died 12 days later on June 6, 1961, never responding to Bill's questions in his inquiries. Fascinating stuff. I put a link in the chat for those letters that we just read. If you'd like to get copies of them, they're there. We do have a few minutes left. If you want to have some comments or questions, I'll do our best to try and answer that. I hope that didn't confuse too many people.
Thank you. That's great.
Any questions, comments, anything? Rob, you're muted.
I'm responding to the chat. Sorry, Howard. I will, now that I've unmuted. I got to give you credit. So many people say that that Roland went and saw Carl Jung for a year. He stayed there. I can understand where they're getting it from, because a lot of the books, it's Bill, Bill W., Francis Hartigan, and Susan Cheever. The books do say that, but we now know that new information has come out and has changed that completely. And trying to get some people, off that, okay, you got to read this. You got to, keep up with the information that's coming out. Bill was a great storyteller. Everything he said had a point to it. He was trying to get a point across. There's nothing wrong with that. The thing is that when we get into history, we get very anal about it, and it isn't that way. We find out that from writing the big book with Bill Shaber, huge book, thick, bigger than the big book, and he debunked an awful lot of the things that exactly. And we've all gone through it multiple times. I'm still looking for the taxi driver that Bill got into a fight for. I want to find out his name. I've been searching for it. Also, the other thing is, did Bill ever meet Roland? Nobody knows. There's no document that says that they ever saw each other. But let's be honest, they ran in the same circles. You would think they would have bumped into each other. But there's no documentation. So without any documentation, did they? Did they not? We don't know. But we're looking for that documentation. Things do come up every once in a while. Somebody's cleaning out their attic and finds something that, like Clarence Snyder's great grandchildren have, something hidden away. We keep searching. And that's what keeps me going. You know what? The amount of time I spend on rabbit holes on my computer, looking at this book, looking at that book, trying to cross, you know, you know what it's like, Howard. I love it, but we can get very anal about all this stuff.
Yeah.
So you know what? The whole idea is history will not keep you sober,
No.
but it can keep you interested and looking and excited about the whole thing about AAA. And you know what? It's been in the last 5 years that I've got into history. And you know what? I just love this stuff. I can't get enough of it. And Howard, thank you very much. I appreciate everything you bring to it.
Oh, thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Bob.
Thank you. And I've been trying to get the same answer. I've been searching for that taxi driver's name, and I've spoken to just about every historian, that and that I know, and that nobody. They all point out the same thing, that it's of no consequence who this guy was. He just happened to get mentioned, and Bill happened to get into trouble because Bill did what he always does, which is get into fights. Bill was an angry, ugly drunk. He started fights. So he started a fight this particular night, and the boss, who had just given him a shot, he knows his problems. He hired him back. He let him come to work, and he starts this fight, and the guy had to let him go. I learned that guy's name. I learned about the fact that he gave him $2,000 in severance pay, and that $2,000 Bill gave to Lois at night and took it back the next morning and used that $2,000 to buy his place in the business thing that led to the Applejack story. I love how all of this just goes in circles. I start out looking for a taxi driver, and I find out about this $2,000 and his friend that just kind of gave him the money and said, "Just go, don't kill yourself, go take care of yourself." And he used the money to invest in this company, and we have the Applejack story. Wonderful stuff.
Well,
Thanks.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Mark. Could you speak a little bit more on this spiritus contra spiritum? I have an idea, but I'm not clear on it.
Well, what is it? The
The
Latin
Latin-
word
How
for
to
alcohol
form,
is spiritus.
Yes.
Right. The word that we're talking about, the highest form of religious experience, is a spiritual experience.
Okay.
So he's saying, isn't it ironic that the way to solve the spiritus problem is with spiritus?
It's just a different spirit.
Right, different
not the
spirit.
low spirit.
Right.
The chemical.
Right. One is an entity in a sense, which is God, and the other one is the alcohol. And he even used the word the devil. That's an interesting point he made to Bill. One of the things that he held back when he spoke to Roland was he didn't want to use the word the devil. But he explained it to Bill. No, in any case, it's just fascinating stuff. It just is. I thank you for saying that. Trey.
I'm Trey, I'm an alcoholic. That was an awesome presentation. It was great. Could you just hold that book up again? Just so I can write that down. Thank you so much, Howard. Thanks, Kathy. That was great.
It's available on Amazon very easily, very readily. It's written by a guy named Ian McCabe, McCabe.
Yeah, that,
Okay.
that was awesome. Thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Big book with kind of big printing, so it doesn't take too long to read. Uh, thanks, guys. Thank you, Rob. Rob put up in the chat the window of opportunity part 3. Window of opportunity is an approach that we put together for dealing with thank you, Rob, for dealing with the chronic alcoholic who's going to relapse in 48 hours. What do you do with that guy? We want people to come to us with the desperation of drowning men, and then what do? we sit down and take 6 months to get them through the big book, and they'll be dead 10 times over. So the window of opportunity was created to get them to some kind of inventory, to some kind of amends, to some kind of spiritual enrichment, and then with an enlightened spirit, they can buy the time to go through the book the real way, the slow way, the word for word way. That's what the window of opportunity is. We've gone through 2 of these 4 sessions. If you want copies of it, I'm sure Rob could put the link in the chat for the Growing and Understanding group. They have the recordings. And the next session is Friday at 5 o'clock Eastern and next Friday. So we've got 2 more parts to it. And if you'd like to be part of the group, this, and you'd like a copy of the manual, we have a playbook that we use. Just send a request to me to the bigbookstudy@aol.com, and I'll send you a copy. All right. Who did I saw? Caleb, do you have your hand up?